Settle into the quiet. Let the noise of your day fade until only stillness remains. The kind of stillness that feels like the hush before a tide pulls away from shore. In this quiet, imagine a sound soft, rhythmic, endless. The deep creak of old wood shifting under strain, ropes sighing, the faint slosh of dark water against a hull. You are hearing the sea as men heard it 500 years ago. Vast, indifferent, and eternal. Before you, there is nothing but ocean. Behind you, only the memory of land. The age of exploration was born from courage. Yes, but also from desperation. The men who set sail in the 15th century did not do so out of comfort or curiosity alone. They went because their world was small, their bellies empty, and their kings hungry for gold. The ships were miracles of their time. Fragile wooden worlds adrift upon infinite blue. They were meant for discovery, but they were also prisons of salt and wood, carrying fragile bodies and stubborn hope into an ocean that wanted nothing to do with either. The sea was beautiful in the way danger often is. To stand upon the deck at dawn and see the horizon bleeding into the sky was to feel something close to holiness. But beauty and terror are old companions. The same wind that filled the sails could twist into a gale within moments. The same stars that guided them could disappear for weeks behind cloud and rain. And beneath it all, the sea waited impartial, endless, and alive in its silence. As you listen tonight, imagine yourself aboard one of these vessels. You are far from land, surrounded by men whose faces are as weathered as the planks beneath your feet. The air tastes of salt and sweat. The deck rocks gently, the world swaying in rhythm with the tide. It is cold, though the sun burns your skin. Every sound is alive. The groan of timbers, the low murmur of prayers, the call of gulls that seem to mock the men below. Before we begin our voyage, take a slow breath. Let it settle. And if you find comfort in these slow wanderings through the forgotten corners of history, if you enjoy the quiet stories of endurance, of dust and time and human frailties, then consider subscribing to this channel. Every episode is a journey into another age, told softly so you can drift through history the way these ships once drifted across the sea. Now, hold the railing of time and step aboard. The deck sways beneath you. The ropes creak overhead. Somewhere, a bell rings in the mist. The voyage has begun. Life aboard a 15th century ship was not the adventure the paintings promised. It was a long, slow ordeal of endurance, dirt, and dampness. Each morning began in the half-dark beneath the deck, where air was thick and heavy with the smell of rot. The sailors woke in hammocks that swayed gently, strung above barrels of grain and crates of spoiled meat. They woke coughing, or scratching at bites, or swearing softly into the dark. The boards above them dripped with condensation, and the sound of waves against the hull never ceased a reminder that the world outside was water. And that water wanted... The smell down there was indescribable, but if you tried to name it, you might start with mold. Then add smoke from the galley fire, tar from the ropes, sweat, and something else. Something sour and human. The air did not move. There was no window, only small cracks of light between the planks. Rats thrived there, fearless, moving between the sleeping men and their meager stores. To the sailors, they were more nuisance than threat. In truth, they were companions. Rats meant the ship was alive. When they vanished, it meant the food was gone, or the ship was doomed. A sailor's diet was punishment disguised as sustenance. Hardtack the ship's bread was so hard it could last for years, but often carried weevils that wriggled inside the cracks. You could knock it on a table and hear it clack like stone. Salted beef or pork provided protein, though by the second month, it was more salt than meat. To soften the biscuit, sailors dipped it in ale warm, sour, and cloudier in water. If tasted, the water turned green with algae within days of departure, stored in wooden casks that leaked and warped. Fresh water was so precious that men sometimes caught rain in their hands and swallowed it greedily before it hit the deck. Hunger was constant, but thirst was worse. The ocean mocked them miles upon miles of undrinkable water, stretching in every direction. On calm days, when the wind failed, the ship would drift for hours or days, the heat rising, tempers flaring. Men grew delirious, their tongues swelling, their lips cracked and bleeding. There were no cures, no mercy, only endurance. Those who complained too loudly were silenced. Those who weakened were left to fade quietly, wrapped in canvas and slid into the sea at dusk. Work was endless. The sails needed tending, ropes tightening, decks scrubbed, leaks patched. The ship itself seemed alive, and like any living thing, it demanded care. Each creak had meaning, a warning, a sigh, a question. A good sailor knew the ship's language by heart. When storms came, all hands worked without rest. They climbed the rigging barefoot, their skin raw from salt, their fingers bleeding. Lightning flashed so close it blinded them. Thunder rolled so deep it seemed to shake the bones of the world. They lashed themselves to the mast to keep from being thrown overboard, shouting orders through wind that tore words apart. When calm returned, exhaustion set in like a second tide. The men moved slowly, their muscles aching, their eyes hollow. Some prayed, others cursed, but all of them, in their own way, were believers in the thin line of wood that kept them from the sea's open mouth. They did not speak of fear. Fear was constant. Instead, they spoke of home, or of ports they had seen, or of women who might be waiting. The truth of life at sea was that it never stopped. There was no night off, no moment of true rest. Even when the sea was calm and the stars hung like silver nails in the black sky, someone always had to be awake. The watch changed every few hours, and the line between days blurred. The men marked time not by calendars, but by meals, bells, and the slow waxing and waning of the moon. It was said that a month at sea could stretch like a year, and yet, sometimes, whole weeks vanished into sameness. Sky, sea, horizon repeated until thought itself grew sluggish. Their clothes, soaked with salt, never fully dried. The salt stiffened the fabric until it scratched the skin raw. Boots wore out quickly. So did hands. Rope burned fingers until they grew thick with calluses. The skin peeled, cracked, and bled. But no one noticed. Pain was part of the rhythm of the ship. Another quiet sound beneath the creak of wood and the murmur of waves. To live aboard was to accept discomfort as error, something you breathed without question. Disease was a quiet killer. The word scurvy was not yet understood, though its effects were known all too well. Gums swelled and turned dark, teeth loosened and fell, old wounds reopened. The men spoke of it as a curse, a punishment for sins unnamed. They didn't know it came from the lack of fruit, of fresh greens, of anything living. They couldn't know that the very sea which promised discovery was draining life from within them. And yet, they sailed on. There was also the mind, the loneliness that came creeping in like fog. Out there, the horizon was both a companion and a tormentor. It never changed. The sound of the waves was soothing, yes, but it could also become maddening. Some men began to hear voices in the waves. Others saw shapes in the fog, and a few went utterly still, staring at nothing for hours. The officers called it melancholy. The men called it the sea's whisper. It was said that if you listened closely, it would call your name. Superstition filled the gaps that reason could not reach. Sailors tied charms to the mast, whispered prayers to the wind, and refused to whistle. For whistling, they said, could summon a storm. A black cat was a blessing. A priest on board, a curse. They believed the sea had moods, that she could be angered or soothed. Some ships carried women carved into the prow, not for decoration, but as guardians. Her wooden eyes stared into the endless dark, her mouth forever silent. They believed she saw what they could not. The hierarchy aboard was rigid. Officers ate better, slept better, and carried the authority of discipline. Common sailors labored for survival, moving in obedience to shouted orders. But beneath that structure was a kind of fraternity, born of necessity. When the sails tore, when the waves crashed high, when the ship listed dangerously to one side, all ranks disappeared. Then they were simply men, hands clinging to ropes, hearts beating in unison, their voices lost in the roar of the wind. and there were moments rare, fleeting, when the sea gave them peace. Sometimes, after days of storm, the world would fall utterly still. The water became glass. The horizon melted into the sky until there was no boundary between them. In those moments, the sailors would stand silent, their exhaustion forgotten. Dolphins might appear, racing alongside the hull, or bioluminescent plankton would glow beneath the surface, tracing light with every ripple. The men said it was magic. In truth, it was science they didn't yet have words for. But wonder, for them, was enough. Letters home were rare and often never delivered. When a ship did reach port, men crowded to find parchment, ink, and space to write. Their handwriting was rough, their words simple. I am alive. The sea is endless. Tell my mother I am well. They sealed their words with wax and hope, never knowing if they'd be read. Many were not. The ocean kept its secrets. Letters, men, and whole ships swallowed without trace. The families left behind waited, prayed, and sometimes stopped waiting. Even on calm days, death was never far. A fall from the rigging, a rope snapping, a barrel rolling in a storm. The smallest accident could take a life. The burial was brief and wordless. A few men gathered at the rail, the body sewn into canvas. The year was 1519. The world was still, in many ways, unknowable. Maps ended abruptly, with sea monsters drawn where the ink ran out. No one yet knew how wide the ocean truly was, or what waited beyond the edge of their certainty. It was into that uncertainty that Ferdinand Magellan sailed, a Portuguese navigator under the flag of Spain, a man who believed he could reach the Indies by sailing west. It was an audacious thought, and a perilous one. But ambition, in those years, was often stronger than reason. His fleet, 5 ships, no larger than fishing boats by modern eyes, set out from Seville. De Trinidad, San Antonio, Concepcion, Victoria, and Santiago, each one crowded with men, supplies, livestock, and a kind of hopeful fear that filled the air like mist. They drifted down the Guadalquivir River and into the Atlantic, their sails swelling like lungs taking their first breath of adventure. Behind them, Europe faded its cathedrals, its kings, its wars. Ahead lay only the vastness of water. The first weeks were deceptively kind. The Atlantic shimmered beneath them, and the winds carried them easily southward. But the sea, like fate, changes without warning. Storms rose from the horizon like mountains, the waves folding over themselves until sky and ocean were indistinguishable. The men clung to masts slick with rain, shouting prayers they barely remembered. The air filled with the smell of wet wood and fear. When the storm finally passed, they counted the damage. Broken spars, torn sails, barrels lost. Yet they were alive, and that was enough. They followed the coastline of South America, searching for a passage, a secret river that would lead them through to the Western Sea. The days grew shorter. The men's breath turned to mist in the morning, and the decks were coated with frost. They did not know it then, but they were nearing the edge of the known world. The place where continents splinter into icy channels and the wind stops. Patagonia, the land of endless emptiness. Here, their hunger deepened. Supplies rotted, water grew foul. They tried to fish, but the ocean was too rough. They killed seabirds and boiled them into thin stew. Men grew sick with scurvy, their bodies betraying them one by one. Some whispered that Magellan had gone mad, chasing a dream that would drown them all. Mutini Briwed slow, secret, like a shadow spreading through the ship's corridors. One night, it came to life. Officers were seized, swords drawn, the decks filled with shouting, brief, frantic, then silent again. Magellan acted swiftly, coldly. He had the ringleaders executed and left their bodies to the tide. The rebellion ended, but the unease did not. The men followed orders, but trust was gone. They sailed now, not for glory, but for survival. Winter descended, and the wind sharpened. They took shelter in a desolate bay surrounded by cliffs of ice. There, they waited 4 months. The ships were battered by gales that screamed like voices. Men mended sails by firelight, their fingers numb. They sang to keep their sanity. Sometimes, in the distance, they saw strange figures on the shore. Tall, cloaked in animal hides, carrying spears. These were the people of Patagonia, the giants of sailors, tailies. They traded fish for trinkets and vanished into the snow. At last, the ice began to melt. The men raised anchor and pushed forward once more. On October 21st, 1520, they found what they had been searching for, a narrow passage of water winding through mountains and mist. It was treacherous, cold, and endless. But when they emerged from the far side, the ocean before them was calm, almost gently. Magellan named it Mar Pacifico, the peaceful sea. The irony, though unintentional, would linger through the centuries. For months, they crossed the Pacific. No land, no rescue, just water and silence. They drifted beneath stars, brighter than any they had seen before. Their charts were useless now. The sky was their only guide. Scurvy returned. Krela Saber. The men's bodies weakened. Their spirits thinned. They boiled sawdust into gruel, ate rats, chewed leather straps softened in seawater. Still, they sailed on, driven by something more stubborn than hope. Perhaps pride, or faith, or simply the impossibility of turning back. When at last they sighted land, the islands of the Philippines, they wept. After more than 3 months at sea, the green of palm trees was almost painful to their eyes. Here, they found warmth, food, and rest. But the calm was brief. Magellan, ever the explorer, sought not only geography, but faith. He converted local rulers to Christianity and drew the wrath of others. On April 27, 1521, he faced a group of island warriors on the beach of The sea watched as the tide came in, and Magellan fell. He did not see the completion of his dream. It was the ship Victoria, Unde, Juan Sebastián Elcano, that limped back to Spain in 1522. Tattered, skeletal, but triumphant. Of the 270 men who had left with Magellan, only 18 returned. They carried spices, but more importantly, they carried proof. The world was round, and it could be circled. The voyage changed everything. Maps, empires, imagination itself. Yet for those who survived, it was less a triumph than a memory etched in exhaustion. They had seen the world's vastness, not as beauty, but as hunger, distance, and silence. Imagine, if you will, standing on that deck as the ship approached home, thinner, smaller, quieter than when it had left. The harbor bells ringing, the smell of land after 3 years of salt and rot. The realization that the earth, for all its enormity, could fit into a single human story. And above them, as always, the sea kept its calm expression, endless, indifferent, eternal. The mysteries of the compass, how navigation shaped human faith and fear. The compass, simple as it seems, was the quiet revolution of its age. A sliver of magnetized metal suspended in still water, delicate, trembling, whispering of unseen forces. It changed not only how sailors traveled, but how they thought about the world. Before it, men followed coastlines in memory. After it, they began to believe that the invisible could be measured, trusted, and obeyed. The ocean before the compass was a living thing. Unknowable, temperamental, and vast beyond comprehension. Sailors once relied on the flight of birds, the scent of vegetation in the breeze, the faint color of water that hinted at reefs or shoals. They carried in their minds a map of signs that were never written. The taste of air before a storm, the way clouds gathered above unseen land. It was intuition, sharpened by survival. But it was never certain. When the compass arrived, it brought certainty, or at least the illusion of it. That tiny, trembling needle offered order where before there was only chaos. It pointed north, no matter how thick the fog, no matter how dark the sky. Tote sailores mind, it seemed to hold a conversation with the earth itself, as if the world were no longer silent, but whispering directions to those who dared to listen. Imagine a cold morning on a caravel somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. The air smells of brine and damp canvas. The deck creaks as the ship breathes against the swell. A small box sits open on a table near the helm, the needle quivering faintly in rhythm with the motion of the waves. Around it, silence. The silence of men who know that without this small thing, they would be lost beyond recovery. They do not understand why it works. Not truly. They only know that the needle listens to something they cannot see, an unseen alignment between earth and sky. And because they do not understand, they respect it. It becomes a relic, a sacred object hidden beneath layers of ritual and fear. Some captains forbid the crew from touching it. Others burn incense or whisper prayers before consulting it, as though its guidance could be offended. Even among scholars, the compass was shrouded in mystery. Philosophers debated how it knew where to point. Some said it drank the power of the stars, absorbing light invisible to the human eye. Others insisted it sought out the pole star, drawn to its eternal stillness. A few thought the needle contained within it a tiny soul, restless, seeking its home across the horizon. And so, the compass existed between two worlds, science and superstition, faith and measurement. It was the bridge between the medieval and the modern mind. It did not just point north, it pointed toward the future, toward the first faint idea that the universe might be ordered, predictable, comprehensible. But there was also fear. Because what if it lied? What if, one day, the needle turned the wrong way? Sailors told stories of regions where the compass failed, where mountains of magnet drew it astray, or where strange stars bent its will. Near the equator, its behavior changed subtly, and men whispered that they had reached the edge of the world's breath. When the needle trembled too wildly, it was said to be haunted. In the logbooks of the great explorers, Columbus, Magellan, da Gama, there are moments of quiet unease. Columbus once recorded that the needle no longer pointed directly north, but drifted slightly. He feared what it meant. Told no one, for fear of panic. In that tiny deviation, a few degrees off true, lay the terror that perhaps the universe itself had shifted. For those at sea, the compass became a kind of oracle. They asked it questions without words. Will we find land? Will we live to see home again? Its silence was both comfort and torment. They trusted it more than their senses, even when the stars were hidden, even when the waves rose so high the deck disappeared beneath them. The compass was constant. It did not flinch. It did not feel. It was, in its own way, divine. And yet, there were always moments when it seemed to rebel. During lightning storms, when the sky cracked open with sound and fire, the needle would twitch and dance, turning this way and that as if confused. Some said it was because the heavens themselves were shouting too loudly for it to hear. Others said it was the work of demons, testing men's faith. When dawn returned, and the sea was calm again, they would gather around it, waiting. Slowly, the trembling would fade. The needle would find its stillness. North again. Order restored. A small, wordless sigh of relief would pass through the crew. The compass, more than any cross or sword or crown, was the first true symbol of global unity. Not in politics or language, but in understanding. It taught that the same invisible force pulled on every iron needle, whether in Lisbon or Guangzhou, in Venice or Cairo. It hinted that the earth was not a chaos of regions, but one whole, bound by unseen threads. But it also changed the human heart. When sailors began to trust the compass more than the heavens, something subtle shifted in the world. The stars, once divine guides, became merely reference points. The wind, once the breath of gods, became a pattern to be measured. And the sea, that ancient mirror of myth and fear, became, slowly, a map. In the quiet hours of night watch, when the ocean seemed infinite and the ship's timbers groaned like old trees, the helmsman would often rest his gaze on the compass. The candle flame flickered, and the needle glowed faintly under the glass. It was a fragile flame of knowledge in a universe of darkness. It reminded them that even in the emptiest space, something constant remained. Perhaps that was why so many sailors carried tiny compasses with them. Even when ashore, small, worn instruments kept in pockets or around necks. It was not about finding their way on land. It was about believing that somewhere there was always direction, even when the world made none. Over time, the compass gave birth to new sciences. The study of magnetism, of the Earth's poles, of planetary motion. But for most men who sailed with it, those theories meant little. To them, the compass was not an equation. It was faith, made tangible, a proof that the world cared enough to guide them home. And in that quiet faith lay a paradox. The compass was both human and inhuman. It was made by men's hands, yet obeyed laws they could not command. It was reliable, but not theirs. In trusting it, they surrendered a part of themselves to something they could never fully understand. Even centuries later, when navigation had become a science of precision and latitude, sailors still spoke of the compass with reverence. When they polished its brass housing, they did so slowly, as if tending to something alive. The soft ticking sound as it moved was like the heartbeat of the ship itself. And as ships grew larger and compasses more complex, their symbolism deepened. They came to represent the relationship between control and surrender, between mastery of the sea and acceptance of its vastness. A captain might command his crew, chart his course, plan his voyage. But the compass reminded him that all control was temporary. The needle could always waver. The sea could always change. Perhaps that is why, in the quiet of the captain's cabin, amid the scent of oil and parchment, the compass rested not beside weapons, but beside books and prayer beads. It was not merely an instrument. It was a meditation, a reminder that, even when all seemed lost, one could always find a bearing, however faint, toward home. And so, the compass became not just a tool of discovery, but a philosophy. It taught humanity that there is order in the unknown, if only we learn to listen for it. It taught patience, humility, and the quiet courage of those who seek direction not by sight, but by trust. Tonight, as we drift through this memory of the age of exploration, imagine that faint tremor of the needle beneath your hand. Delicate, faithful, eternal. Imagine the hush of the sea outside, the lanterns swaying, the timbers creaking softly. Imagine the feeling of knowing that, no matter how far you've gone, there is always something steady, unseen, pointing you home. Inside a captain's cabin, power, isolation, and the illusion of control. The captain's cabin was both sanctuary and prison. Within its timbered walls, trimmed with brass and the faint scent of tar and tobacco, decisions were made that could mean the survival or death of everyone aboard. The room was small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a map-strewn desk, and a chest filled with personal effects, a portrait, a pocket watch, perhaps a letter yellowed from months of damp sea air. Outside, the ocean raged or whispered, indifferent to rank. Inside, the captain sat alone, charting the line between authority and uncertainty. There was a quiet hierarchy at sea, unspoken but absolute. The captain's word was law, yet that law was written in fear. Fear of mutiny, fear of the weather, fear of God. The men below deck saw him as both father and warden, a figure who dined better, slept alone, and bore the unbearable weight of direction. But power at sea was never clean. It eroded like wood under salt water, slowly eaten away by the endless creak of the hull and the sleepless hours of decision-making that no one else could share. At night, when the ship groaned and the wind sang through the rigging like a low, haunting flute, the captain's cabin became a stage for doubt. He would stare into his maps, inked lines that promised order in a world of chaos. The flickering lantern made coastlines ripple like waves, and the compass needle, once steady, seemed to tremble with fatigue. Some captains prayed, others drank, a few whispered to the sea, asking questions that had no answers. In the stillness between waves, even command felt fragile. The instruments of authority surrounded him. A sextant, an hourglass, a logbook filled with trembling handwriting. These were symbols of reason, of mastery over distance and direction. But the sea never truly submitted. Every chart was a guess. Every route was a compromise with the unknown. And when storms rose without warning, as they often did, even the calmest, most rational mind could unravel under the roar of thunder and the crash of splintering wood. In those moments, the captain's isolation was absolute. The crew might curse or pray, but he had to remain the anchor, not because he was fearless, but because fear in him would shatter the fragile illusion that kept men rowing, climbing, hauling ropes in darkness. He might shout orders over the wind, his voice steady while his hands trembled unseen. Beneath the uniform and authority, he was as human as the lowest Deccan tired, cold, longing for land, for a face remembered only in dreams. And yet, in calmer times, that same solitude could become intoxicating. There was a quiet satisfaction in command, the rhythm of giving orders, of seeing the ship respond like a living creature, wood and sail moving in harmony with his will. The captain's cabin, then, became not a prison, but a throne. By the time the moon climbed high above the sails, the Captain S's world had shrunk to the faint glow of his lantern and the steady rhythm of the ship's timbers, groaning beneath him. Every sound, the hush of the waves, the snap of canvas, the murmur of footsteps above deck, became part of a single, endless pulse. In that reachivam there was both comfort and torment. It reminded him that the ship still lived, still moved forward, but also that it could turn against him in an instant. He kept his logbook close, the pages swollen from humidity, edges curled like leaves. Each entry was a quiet confession. Coordinates, weather, the state of the crew. But between the neat lines of ink, there were unspoken things. His doubts, the weariness behind decisions, the names of sailors buried at sea that he would never write down. When storms came, he would clutch that logbook like a talisman. It was, perhaps, the only thing that connected him to order in a world ruled by chaos. The furniture of the cabin itself told a story. The desk was bolted to the floor, every drawer secured with small iron latches, a reminder that nothing aboard could be trusted to stay still. A half-burned candle leaned against the edge, its wax hardened in layers from nights of watchfulness. The single porthole, often fogged with salt, let in a narrow ribbon of light that shimmered with motion. The cabin never stopped moving, a slow, perpetual sway, as if the world itself breathed beneath him. In the solitude of command, the mind began to wander. Many captains reported hearing voices, the creak of the hull forming words, the wind whispering their names. Some believed it was the sea itself, testing them. Others called it madness, but even those who mocked such superstition would admit, privately, that the ocean had moods, a calm so deep it felt watchful, a sudden gust that seemed almost deliberate. When one spent too many nights alone with nothing but maps and memory, reason softened like damp rope. Letters from home, if they arrived at all, were sacred. He would unfold them with care, holding the paper as though it were the hand of someone far away. The ink often blurred from moisture, but the words still carried warmth. They reminded him of things that didn't rock or tilt or groan in the night. A hearth, a garden, the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Yet after a few moments, the letters would go back into their box. The sea demanded attention, and sentiment was a dangerous luxury. Meals were solitary affairs, taken quickly and without pleasure. The captain ate slightly better than his crew. Salted meat, less spoiled. Biscuit, less infested. But the taste was always the same. Fatigue, salt, and metal. Sometimes he would pour a small measure of rum, not to celebrate, but to quiet the nerves. The ship had its share of hidden drinkers, of course, but the captain could not afford to be one of them. His sobriety was as much a performance as his authority. There were moments, however, when the illusion of control felt almost real. The ship gliding smoothly across a sunlit sea, the sails full and white, the crew moving with precision, all obeying the invisible hand of command. In those times, the captain felt the faint echo of divinity. The sea seemed almost to yield. He would stand by the rail, hands clasped behind his back, watching the wake stretch into infinity. Yet Aventane, a part of him, knew the truth, that every calm was only a pause between tempests. He carried the weight of men's lives, a burden that aged even the youngest captains. Every sickness, every disappearance, every failure to find land became a shadow in his mind. At night, when he lay in his narrow berth, those shadows gathered at the edge of consciousness. They whispered that he could not save them all. That command was only a fragile disguise for helplessness. Still, he rose each morning and played his part. The hat, the coat, the posture. These were the garments of certainty. When he stepped onto the deck and the crew saluted, they were not seeing the man. They were seeing the idea of him. The captain was not allowed to waver, because belief in him was what kept the ship afloat, as surely as the wood and rope. Sometimes, in rare quiet, he would lower himself to the floor and press his palm against the planks, feeling the hum of the ship beneath him, as if listening for a heartbeat. He imagined it breathing with him, alive in its own way, a companion, a creature, a burden. And though he commanded it, he also feared it, knowing that the ocean always had the final word. The great irony of his life was that the higher he climbed, the lonelier he became. The sea offered no applause, no forgiveness, no end. It simply watched, endless, indifferent, immense. The captain's power was an illusion carved from ritual and repetition, from ink and compass and habit. Yet within that illusion, men found meaning. And perhaps that was enough. For when the ship reached port, when boots met solid earth again, there was a strange emptiness. The noise of the city felt too sharp, the ground too still. Many captains, after a lifetime at sea, would pace in their sleep as though still listening for the creak of ropes or the shift of waves. The silence of land was the one thing they could not endure. In the captain's cabin, that narrow cell of command and solitude, history itself was written one decision at a time, quietly, cautiously, with ink that faded long before the ocean ever did. And when his logbook finally closed, and another man took his place at the helm, the sea continued its slow, endless breathing, as if nothing at all had happened. When the voyage ends, it does not feel like an ending. The harbor appears slowly, through mist and gull cries, and yet the sea still moves beneath the hull, the same rhythm, the same endless breathing. The sailors lean over the rails, staring at the shapes of rooftops and the faint blur of trees, unsure if they are home or dreaming. The captain stands apart, silent, watching the horizon that has always felt more familiar than the land. The ship sighs as the anchor drops. The water folds around it, rippling outward in soft circles that fade quickly, as though the ocean is already forgotten. Ropes creak, boots strike the deck, and shouts of release echo down the masts. For a moment, there is laughter, but it is the laughter of men who've seen too much fragile, uncertain, the kind that dies quickly in the wind. You might imagine that such journeys would end in triumph, but they rarely did. The maps were updated. Yes, the routes recorded. The king or queen satisfied with new lines drawn upon the globe. But for the sailors who lived the voyage, there was no true conclusion. Their bodies carried the rhythm of the waves long after the land returned beneath their feet. Their minds drifted at night to the soft thud of water against wood, to the sound of the wind through canvas, a lullaby of hardship that had become part of them. For centuries, these voyages continued the same hunger, to Semephier, the same search for something beyond the known. The ships changed, their hulls stronger, their sails broader, their cargo more complex. But the sea remained what it always was, vast, unknowable, unfeeling. A mirror in which humanity could see both its courage and its folly reflected endlessly. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them still. The low hum of the crew, the murmur of prayer before dawn, the soft scrape of a pen across a logbook deep below deck. Those sounds echo through time, faint but steady. Reminders of the quiet endurance that shaped so much of history. The men who braved the edges of the world did not always find what they sought, but their journeys built the bones of our maps, the roots of our trade, the rhythm of our modern lives. The ocean, of course, remembers none of it. It swallows everything. The ships that sank, the bones that settled into silt, the stories that went unspoken. The waves erase names and ambitions with the same gentle indifference. And yet, in that erasure, there is a strange kind of peace, a reminder that nothing, not even power or suffering, endures forever. Tonight, as you lie in the quiet, imagine the creak of an old ship rocking softly in the dark, the scent of salt, the faint chill of wind and wood, the slow rhythm of the tide. Somewhere, beyond the noise of the world, that motion continues, steady, patient, eternal. The same sea that carried explorers and dreamers still breathes beneath the stars, indifferent yet beautiful. And perhaps that is what history truly is. Not a record of triumph or failure, but a long, ceaseless tide, one that rises and falls across generations, carrying with it all our stories, all our struggles, until they dissolve into silence. Thank you for joining this quiet voyage. If your eyes are still open, take a deep breath. Let the sound of the sea fade into calm, and allow your thoughts to drift like a ship finding its way home through the mist. And if you'd like to sail with us again through the quieter corners of history, don't forget to subscribe, so you can return to these forgotten shores whenever sleep feels far away. The sea is still there. It always will be. Waiting, patient, unchanging, beneath the moon, beneath time itself. And for now, you can rest. The waves will carry the rest of the story.